Let's get some corporate headlines now. And Nokia, the world's largest mobile phone maker, has issued a profits warning in the past hour or so. The company has seen its share price drop in recent weeks as analysts expected it to follow in the footsteps of the likes of Ericsson and could see that sales have been falling. Well, now you're watching BBC News 24. It's our business coverage, of course, and we have some remarkable pictures coming in from New York, which we can go to now, and they show us that one of the world's tallest buildings, right in the heart of the business district of Manhattan, the World Trade Center, appears to be on fire. As you can see, something has clearly happened towards the top of the building, and these are very dramatic live pictures coming into the BBC right now. The World Trade Center exists at the very lower tip of Manhattan Island, and 5 or 6 years ago it was the subject of, I think, the first Middle East terror outrage in the United States, for which there were later court convictions. But clearly all we could do for the time being is look at these pictures and just wonder what on earth has happened there. Not only is this one of the world's tallest buildings, it's also a major landmark in this major city. So if you're just joining us on News 24, you are in the middle of business coverage. It's our daily lunchtime business roundup, and we're just getting these pictures live into BBC Television Centre. We noticed them only a few moments ago. It is the World Trade Center, just north of Battery Park and the southern tip of Manhattan Island in New York, just around the corner from the very center of the financial district, Wall Street, of course. And there's a very serious fire has broken out, and we don't know why that should have broken out yet. I can see another shot which shows me a New York Fire Department helicopter in the air nearby. I'm just being told that what's happened here is that a plane has crashed into the World Trade Center. That would make sense with what our pictures are showing us there. It looks like the plane went in towards the top end of the building, and possibly bits of it have come out the other side, because there appear to be two large holes in the top of one of these twin towers, where smoke is now billowing out. I'm now going to hand you back to our main news team on duty at News 24, Val Sanderson and John Nicholson.
John, thank you for that. We've limited information about the pictures that we're seeing at the moment. As you can see, that's the World Trade Center in New York, down Wall Street, the financial district, of course, in New York. The information that we have at this moment is that a plane has crashed into the World Trade Center, which has set it on fire. There's a gaping hole, as you can see, in the upper floors of the World Trade Center. We have no news as yet of any casualties. That's a wider shot there that you can see. Of course, they're twin towers. America, of course, is 5 hours behind us, so it's morning in New York. These towers, of course, were affected by a terrorist outrage a number of years ago when a bomb was planted. That was thereafter. There was a high-profile trial in the United States of those accused of terrorism. For a long time, of course, the World Trade Centers were the tallest buildings in the world. They're no longer so. I think they've been overtaken by towers in Kuala Lumpur. We understand that there was a passenger aircraft that crashed in and caused this. As we say, at this moment, we have no idea exactly how many people have been killed. More information coming in. The plane apparently was coming in low and it hit the World Trade Center at a slight angle. That's according to eyewitness reports. Large holes were visible in 2 sides of the 110-story building, one of the landmark twin towers. It was a passenger plane. It's believed it was a passenger plane with passengers on board. And of course, this is a busy office building with many people at work there. The plane struck just a few moments before 9 a.m., which is, it's now 2:02 in the United Kingdom. 9 a.m., of course, just a couple of minutes ago, American time.
And as you can see, black smoke is pouring out of 2 gaping holes. We've had, there we see a helicopter going by.
There is a further there's a further dramatic explosion we're just witnessing there. We saw a plane, a small plane, passing by, and there seems to be a further explosion. This is the original plane which hit the World Trade Tower, the North Tower of the World Trade Tower. That was just a few moments ago, just before 2 o'clock United Kingdom time.
And as we can see, John, both towers now appear to be on fire. This seems to be absolutely extraordinary, what's unfolding in front of our eyes. As you can see there, both towers of the World Trade Center seem to be on fire.
We're having confirmation that was a second plane hitting, this time, the South Tower. So that's a plane hitting the North Tower just a few moments ago, and now a plane hitting the South Tower just a few minutes later on.
Of course, we don't know what conditions are like there, John, do we? We don't know about the immense drafts of wind or whatever that are being caused by the flames and the smoke. And indeed, apparently, the explosion that a Reuters reporter has said happened actually at the scene. No word yet on injuries or fatalities in this disaster. But of course, very early yet, we have had one eyewitness account from a reporter who said the original plane that collided with one of the twin towers, the plane was coming in low and it looked like it hit at a slight angle, according to one of the reporters. And as you can see, large holes are now visible in both of the twin towers. These huge landmarks in New York, both of them 110 stories high. Now, with us we have one of our foreign correspondents who has visited the World Trade Center. From what you can see there, David, tell us what it's like, because this is a working building, isn't it, as well as a landmark building?
It's jaw-dropping what we're seeing, isn't it? Absolutely extraordinary. They were built as a speculative office building, as a really rather grand symbol of New York. The tallest buildings there now, and now, as we can see, in smoke and in flames. They have suffered, as you'll know, before, from a very serious terrorist attack. Osama bin Laden, who's the most wanted man in America, now resident in Afghanistan, his men set off a bomb in the basement of one of those towers in 1993, and the aim of that bomb was to topple one tower into the other, and there was all sorts of speculation that there might even have been cyanide gas in that explosion. Only 6 people died in that because ultimately the bomb didn't carry out the extraordinary destructive damage which had been planned on that occasion. But from what we saw just now, and seeing it on the replay, that second plane that went into one of these towers just now certainly looked like a deliberate hit on the World Trade Center. The first one may well have been a chance, but that second one was, we saw the plane flying into it.
We're interrupting normal programs to bring you extraordinary pictures from the United States, where both towers of the World Trade Center are now on fire.
2 planes have now smashed within minutes of each other into the twin towers of New York's landmark World Trade Center in the rush hour of New York, just around 9 o'clock this morning. With me is our Foreign Affairs correspondent, David Loyne, who has visited the World Trade Center. And as you were saying, David, this is not only office buildings, but very, very popular with tourists as well.
Absolutely. It's one of the prime tourist sites of New York. You get this incredible view right over Manhattan from the tops of those towers because they are so tall. They stand right at the end of the island rather prominently as a sort of symbol, in a way, of American power, and that's what makes them such a potential target for terrorists. And certainly looking at that second plane, I think we are now talking about a terrorist attack, unless that was some bizarre coincidence. The timing, people still coming into work, those offices would have been filling up, the escalators would have been full of people coming into work, the restaurant at the top, people might have been having breakfast there. and it's impossible to imagine just what's going on in there at the moment.
Let me just tell you some news just coming in. We understand that one of the planes anyway, David, was hijacked before the crash. That would fit in with the scenario that you were suggesting.
Well, absolutely, and that must have been the first one. There's thought that that was a passenger plane hijacked and flown into the towers.
Now, ABC television in the United States has suspended its normal coverage. Let's go to them to find out what they are saying about this extraordinary sight.
Traveling from north to south, struck the North Tower here of the World Trade Center, very near the top, near the 80th floor from what we are hearing, creating that gaping hole that you see in the north side of the building. Shortly after that, as the first building was engulfed in flames, we were on our way to the scene and we witnessed a second airplane from what I believe in my experience to be a Boeing 737 strike the south side of the second tower, the south tower, and that is the second row of flames that you see here. That airplane appeared to hit a little bit down the building around the 50th or 60th floor. Again, it struck flush into the south side of the South World Trade Center building. And this is actually here, appears to be debris that has passed through the building and is currently on fire. As far as air traffic in the New York metropolitan area, we can tell you what we're hearing from air traffic control is that all operations at the New York airports, being Newark, John F. Kennedy International, and LaGuardia Airport, all air traffic operations has been suspended. As far as other aircraft traffic right now, us included, we are being kept at a distance of 5 miles from the site of this absolute disaster. We cannot get a good look at what is happening on the ground, but again, initial eyewitness reports from the scene stated that actually very little of the debris from the airplane fell down to the street. Most of it appears to be embedded in the buildings here, both World Trade Center number 1 and World Trade Center number 2.
John, can you hear me?
And that is coverage in the United States of America. That was ABC television there, reporting live on the World Trade Center, as you can see there, on fire.
Okay, Valerie, we can cross over now to our correspondent Stephen Evans in New York. Stephen Evans, our economic correspondent there. Steve, I understand that you were in the World Trade Center when it was struck.
I was on the ground floor of the building, sitting in a chair, waiting for somebody to turn up, as you do. There was a huge bang. It felt to me like somebody dropped a skip full of rubbish, a great container full of rubbish from a very great height, in the yard which separates the two huge towers which are the World Trade Center. The building physically shook, but it's one of those things where you think, well, something's happened on a building site, that's the way it is. But seconds later, there were 2 or 3 similar huge explosions, and the building literally shook. You literally shook at the base of this building, at which point people came, I nearly said screaming. They weren't screaming. It was a mild panic, if you like. People simply saying, get out of here, get out of here. People streaming to the other side of the building, at which point smoke appeared everywhere, as though a mist had suddenly settled on the building. We all streamed out, some people running, some people crying, nobody really screaming, across the road, and you look up, and you can see the top of one of the towers, smoke billowing out from it, the odd flame coming out from the top of these towers, pretty well the highest buildings in the world. Everybody then got calm and simply looked up, and as the authorities moved them further and further away, about, I would guess, time is very difficult to judge in these circumstances, but I would guess about 5 minutes later, there was another explosion halfway down the second tower. And that then looked rent, almost as though a child had knocked into a toy, something like that. And again, smoke started billowing out of that second building. I don't know what the cause was. Everybody, I think, initially assumed it was a bomb, but then people kept coming past me saying, no, it was a jet, it was a jet. Whether it was 1 or 2, I simply don't know. I'm now in a hotel about 100 yards from the building. Buildings in the area are being evacuated. People are streaming away. Nobody's saying very much, actually, because they are shocked, as you'd expect them to be. People simply don't quite comprehend what's happening. You can hear the shaking in people's voices as they say, what's going on? What's going on? I don't know. And people are nodding at me now as I say that. The cause, I can't illuminate. All I can tell you, it was a very frightening experience. But people, by and large, reacted very well to it.
What's happening there now, Steve?
People are simply milling around. The area at the base of the tower has now been evacuated as the emergency services go in. I would imagine that the rescue operation has got to be very, very difficult and very, very tentatively done. These buildings are way beyond ladders. I mean, where these explosions occurred are way, way beyond ladders. How the emergency services get up there, and furthermore ascertain that more explosions won't happen, because as I say, these explosions were quite spaced apart. Now, if there are 2 aircraft involved, that may explain that. I presume that the assumption of the emergency services will be, who knows what may now happen. The engineering involved in working out what a plane crashing into a tower that high is incomprehensible. I don't imagine much work has been done on it.
And Steve, looking at the towers now and how damaged there are, there must be a very real risk that they'll fall and onto buildings surrounding. I mean, not only must there be a huge rescue operation on now, they must want to evacuate the area too.
Well, they've evacuated to within, I would have thought, 200 metres of the towers. I presume some kind of assessment of the risk of those buildings falling down has been done. But having said all that, all the engineering work was done when they were built for all kinds of eventualities. These explosions gave those buildings, or the building I was in, one almighty thwack. And it did move, but it didn't feel like it was going to fall down.
Steve Evans, for the moment, thanks very much indeed. Let's go over to hear what the President, George Bush, is saying.
Today, we've had a national tragedy. 2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country. I have spoken to the Vice President, to the Governor of New York, to the Director of the FBI, and have ordered that the full resources of the federal government go to help the victims and their families, and to conduct a full-scale investigation to hunt down and to find those folks who committed this act. Terrorism against our nation will not stand. And now, if you join me in a moment of silence. May God bless the victims, their families, and America. Thank you very much.
And that was President Bush saying that the explosions that have wrecked the World Trade Center buildings from, we think, 2 hijacked planes are terrorist related.
Well, we understand that both planes have been hijacked in Boston. That's what New York television is quoting the police saying, that both these passenger planes, a twin-engine plane which crashed into the North Tower shortly before 2 o'clock our time, and a second passenger plane which crashed into the South Tower shortly after 2, we understand from police sources in New York that both of these passenger planes were hijacked from Boston, flew from Boston onto New York and then crashed into these towers.
Well, let me bring in our diplomatic editor now, Brian Hanrahan. No doubt then, at the highest echelons, Brian, that this is a terrorist attack.
No, I think everybody jumped to that conclusion very quickly. I notice he did say apparent. He's left himself the possibility, but it seems hard to see anything else. And in fact, I was just checking back 4 days ago, the United States issued a worldwide alert saying that they had information, I mean, they were very vague about it, that their citizens and interests were at risk around the world, and putting everybody onto a heightened state of alert. That was accompanied with a kind of specific warning about the Far East, Korea and Japan and military interests there. But there's no doubt they were obviously getting some kind of intelligence suggesting that somebody was doing something, and they may even have some idea who it is. The last time they named anybody was back in May, when they named Osama bin Laden, who has taken refuge in Afghanistan, suggesting that he was actively plotting to launch attacks against the United States and its citizens. And I would imagine that on past form, America will find him as the prime suspect in this case.
We're now getting reports that a third passenger plane has been hijacked. There's no immediate news of its whereabouts. The first 2 planes, according to FBI sources, were hijacked in Boston, but we're getting reports that a third plane was hijacked. I'm joined now by Tom Simons, who's our transport correspondent. How is it possible, if this is true, that 2 planes were hijacked in Boston and managed to travel that distance? It's not a very short distance between Boston and Manhattan without being intercepted.
It may be, of course, that route, Boston to Manhattan, has been carefully chosen, because you say the flying time is very short, but perhaps long enough to give a slight leeway for anybody trying to fly straight towards Manhattan. I imagine that the hour or so it would take to fly that distance would make it very difficult for the American Air Force to mount any form of operation to try and take these planes away from the danger zone. If they have passengers on board, that would be even more difficult, if not impossible. So clearly, we're talking about a carefully planned operation, and it's very difficult to know how it could have been stopped.
OK, Tom, stay with us for an update on that third plane that may have been hijacked as well.
We're getting more.
Valerie.
Thank you. We're getting more news just in, John, that from the Reuters news agency, that a Palestinian group has claimed responsibility for the New York World Trade Center plane attacks. Apparently, Abu Dhabi television reported it had received a call from the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine abroad, claiming responsibility for crashing 2 planes into the World Trade Center buildings. But let me bring in our diplomatic editor, Brian Hanrahan. What do you make of this, Brian?
I'd be cautious. I think we're going to see a lot of claims of responsibility almost immediately after this. Remember, the big suicide bombing in Israel was immediately claimed by 2 different groups. So clearly one of them wasn't telling the truth. So there is a tendency on these occasions for people to leap into the frame very swiftly and say that they're responsible, whereas those who are responsible are often much quieter about it, because to admit responsibility, or at least to be believed, is to bring down retaliation on your head very quickly from the United States, and an angry United States is not something that most groups would want to face up to if they can be reached. So it is possible that these are it, but it seems an unlikely place for a call to come in, and a slightly unusual position. So I think we should treat these with some caution initially.
What will be happening now as far as the diplomatic routes around the world go? Because obviously the American administration have to act fast.
Yes, I mean, they will now be talking to everybody they can find to see if there's any clue whatsoever as to where this is coming from. The obvious... I'm hesitating because I see another building on fire, and we're not quite sure what it is at the moment, coming from Washington, apparently.
It's very like Washington, doesn't it?
And in fact, it looks almost as though it's the area around the White House, but I'm not sure that at this stage, just glancing at it.
This apparently is the Pentagon we're seeing.
We are being told that this is an explosion that we're witnessing in the area around about the Pentagon in Washington, D.C.
Another very symbolic target, if that is the case, if it has been made the choice of an attack, because it obviously represents American power.
We're being told, in fact, that the White House itself has been evacuated.
That would be an obvious precaution at a moment like this. In fact, most of the major buildings in Washington, I suspect, will now find themselves being evacuated. It is quite startling day, almost like something out of a thriller, isn't it, rather than reality. I mean, whoever decided to go down this route was aiming for maximum publicity on the world stage, and has certainly succeeded in drawing major attention to what they're doing.
Well, we're going to cross to our correspondent now in Washington, D.C., Stephen Sveach. Stephen, as you know, 2 planes have crashed into the World Trade Center. We're getting pictures now of smoke billowing in the area of the Pentagon. What more can you tell us about the scene in Washington, D.C.?
These are absolutely extraordinary moments here in Washington, here in really the whole of the United States. The idea that the Pentagon, this is the headquarters of the Defense Department, all of the US military power, which of course has been projected so much around the world, for that to come under attack in this way, if indeed this is an attack on the Pentagon, not some sort of extraordinary coincidence.
Yes, we can interrupt you again. An aircraft has crashed near the United States Defense Department, so we can confirm now that a third plane has crashed, this one near the United States Defense Department. The West Wing of the White House has been evacuated. evacuated, and of course the Pentagon itself has been evacuated. We don't as yet know that this aircraft which crashed near the Defense Department was the one that was hijacked in Boston, but it seems more than coincidence.
Well, I think this really is the most extraordinary day for people here, and for really the whole of the United States. I think never before, I think I'm right in saying, has something on this scale and with this symbolic potency happened here. This seems to be a very, very coordinated operation, and one does wonder, you know, is there anything more coming? You know, this is absolutely quite remarkable, and I think it's going to give Americans a sense of being under threat, if not in physical terms for the whole population. The symbolic power is remarkable and quite chilling, I think, for people here.
Well, of course, there's going to be claim and counterclaim of responsibility. A few moments ago, somebody purporting to represent the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine phoned Abu Dhabi television and claimed responsibility for that. We were cautioned about taking that seriously at the time, and it seems that we were right to exercise some caution, because the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine has denied all responsibility. We're getting reports in from the United States, Valerie, which report that the Federal Aviation Authority says that all planes in the United States are being held on the ground, which is quite extraordinary, unprecedented, I'd have thought, in American history, for every single plane in the United States to be held on the ground.
Indeed, John. Now, I think we're joined on the line now by Abdul Bari Atwan, a Middle East expert. We're getting unconfirmed reports that Middle East terrorists are claiming responsibility. What do you make of that?
If it is a Middle Eastern attack, or there is a Middle Eastern involvement behind that, I'm not surprised if radical Islamic groups like Bin Laden groups or other actually were behind that. Also, Osama Bin Laden issued a fatwa to attack American wherever they are, and he considered them occupying power in his country, Saudi Arabia. So maybe it is the work of radical Islamic group, but you know, I don't have any confirmation. But most of analysis actually, you know, heading toward that conclusion.
The pictures that you're seeing now are desperate attempts to put out the fire, I believe, in the Pentagon. Much of downtown Manhattan, of course, has been evacuated. Eyewitnesses said that the first of the two World Trade Center buildings was hit with a massive explosion, of course. As the first of the planes hit, debris started falling immediately. In fact, I can cross over to our correspondent Steve Evans, who was in the World Trade Center in New York when the first of these two planes hit the World Trade Center. Steve, what was it like to be in the World Trade Center when it was hit?
There's another explosion happening as we speak.
We are seeing another explosion as we speak. The pictures that you're seeing now are of the World Trade Center in New York. These are live pictures, however, that we're now seeing. We're now seeing live pictures of another building exploding in New York. Steve, I know you're at the World Trade Center. There have been two explosions there, but a third explosion has now taken place in New York. Steve, what can you see? Steve, are you with us? What can you see in New York? Just to update you, we now have two explosions in the World Trade Center in New York. We have an explosion in the Pentagon in Washington. The Pentagon has now been evacuated, and we're now getting pictures. These are live pictures that you're seeing.
The World Trade Center there, one of the towers actually collapsing. The latest news, the UN has been evacuated.
These are quite extraordinary scenes.
It is really quite unbelievable that it could happen, that it could happen so swiftly like this, and be there in plain view of everybody We're talking about, what, an hour and a quarter since this began?
These are truly extraordinary and horrific scenes. Our correspondent Greg Barrow is in Manhattan. Greg, what can you see?
Well, as you've been saying, one of the two towers of the World Trade Center has collapsed in the past few minutes, and quite an extraordinary scene down there in the surrounding area. There's smoke billowing still from the one remaining tower, but the collapse of the second tower has caused a huge amount of dust and debris to billow out around the surrounding area, and it must have billowed out at least sort of 300-400 meters around the building, causing yet more panic far away, several blocks away from where the incident originally happened.
Were the authorities able to evacuate the area immediately round the World Trade Center in time? They've had an hour, have they not, since the two explosions in the World Trade Center towers. Were they able to clear the surrounding buildings?
Well, there has been an absolutely frenzied descent of emergency services into that area, attempting to clear people away and get members of the public out. But there are so many people, so many thousands of people work in those buildings. These are two of the biggest office buildings in the world, so you can only imagine how many people are working there, that it's very, very difficult to move that amount of people out of that area very, very quickly at one of the busiest times of the day, just as they were going to work in the morning during the rush hour. And then, of course, with this incident that has just happened with the collapse of one of the towers, you have to remember that many of the emergency services, the firemen, the police, would have been on the ground underneath as that would have happened. I think the atmosphere is one of absolute surprise. People are just stunned. Nobody could imagine this in one of the most densely populated cities in the world. We've seen aerial photographs which show the whole of southern Manhattan shrouded in this grey smoke. It looks like an attack at the very heart of America, and I think that's how it's being perceived by President Bush.
No, we understand that the Prime Minister, Tony Blair, may be about to speak any moment now.
Let's hear what Mr. Blair has to say to the TUC and indeed to everyone watching.
Bill, Congress, as Bill has just informed you, there have been the most terrible, shocking events taking place in the United States of America within the last hour or so, including 2 hijacked planes being flown deliberately into the World Trade Center. I'm afraid we can only imagine the terror and the carnage there, and the many, many innocent people that will have lost their lives. I know that you would want to join with me in sending the deepest condolences to President Bush and to the American people on behalf of the British people at these terrible events. This mass terrorism is the new evil in our world today. It is perpetrated by fanatics who are utterly indifferent to the sanctity of human life. And we, the democracies of this world, are going to have to come together to fight it together and eradicate this evil completely from our world.
Visibly shaken Mr. Blair, talking about what's been going on in the United States this extraordinary day.
We're crossing over now to the United States to hear reports from eyewitnesses.
Tell me again what you saw, what you heard.
Around 6th Avenue and Houston Street, I was trying to make phone calls. I looked up and I heard an explosion, and then I saw everybody in the street react first. People crying, people on the ground, everybody lying down. And then I looked up and I saw this huge plume of smoke and the tower just crumbling, and it just turned into a huge plume of smoke, and next thing you know, there's smoke in one tower.
The doorman goes to me, wow, I never seen a plane flying so low. And we looked out at it, all of a sudden, boom, it seemed like it wasn't even real. And we came running over here closer to the place, and all of a sudden we saw the other explosion. I don't know.
Scenes of people fleeing in panic, as you'd expect in Manhattan.
You were in the which tower?
A tower.
What floor were you on?
First one.
What happened? Tell me.
When a big explosion happened, some guy came out. His skin was all off. I helped him out. This is him all over. There's people jumping out of windows. I've seen at least 14 people jumping out of windows. It's horrific. I can't believe this is happening.
Were you there for the second hit by the plane?
After, about 10 minutes later, it just blew up. A big explosion. People started running. It was just chaos everywhere.
Indeed, three words, I think: terror, chaos and confusion. First reactions there to what's been going on.
We're now being told from New York that the second tower has fully collapsed. Another building, 110 floors in height. The two buildings that make up the World Trade Center are home during office hours to about 50,000 people. Those pictures live from New York. Another hijacked aircraft is, we are being told by the wire services out of the United States, on its way to Washington. Buildings in Chicago are also, we're told, being evacuated. That's what's happened in the past 90 minutes or so. I can also tell you that all flights departing from all American airports have been halted indefinitely.
Well, we will stay with these pictures, and joining me on the telephone line now is James Rubin, of course, former Assistant Secretary of State in the US, now based here in Britain. He joins me on the telephone. Can you just give us your initial reactions to these events across the US?
Well, clearly the United States is under attack. This is the biggest terrorist event in modern history. Clearly it was well timed and well planned, but conducted by the kinds of groups that have only the ability to use cowardly means to kill innocent people by obviously the hundreds, if not more now. The World Trade Center is a symbol of not just the United States, but the global system of civilized peoples getting together, working together, and conducting commerce together. And so I really see it as an attack on all civilized peoples.
Just to update people with the very latest information, news out of two continents. We're hearing that the London Stock Exchange in the City of London has been evacuated. And in addition to that, we're getting reports that Israel is evacuating all its diplomatic staff from all its residences and buildings in the whole of the USA. These are live pictures from the White House in Washington, D.C. That, of course, being evacuated. And indeed, we were reporting just a few minutes ago that many buildings in Chicago have been evacuated as well, including the Sears Tower, one of the tallest buildings in America. That, too, has everybody has been moved out of that building.
Just to bring you the very latest, we have one report from the AP news agency going back to that earlier report of a plane crash in Pittsburgh. The AP news agency is now saying that a large plane has crashed just north of the Somerset County Airport. The first reports say that the local police believe it was a Boeing 767, that's a wide-bodied aircraft, crashed about 10 a.m. local time, about 8 miles east of the Somerset County Airport. And also the Palestinian president, Yasser Arafat, this is according to the Reuters news agency, has condemned the aircraft attacks on the World Trade Center in New York and on the Pentagon in Washington.
Our diplomatic editor, Brian Hanrahan, is still with us. Brian, we're just getting news through from Reuters that Yasser Arafat has condemned these attacks.
Of course, as indeed most other people will. I think we have to be cautious of one or two things. This may not yet be over. We have this report from Pittsburgh of a plane there. There are other reports. They may be panicked, they may be alarmist, but it still has to be considered there is a possibility that this is not yet over. We do know there have been other incidents apart from those we've been reporting. For example, there's a report from the FBI that there was a car bomb at the State Department in Washington, as well as the attack on the Pentagon. So there is a great deal of coordination in this, and it may well be that there is more to come, possibly both in the United States and outside it. I would have thought there's a good reason for caution in many parts of the world tonight. And the other aspect we've got to put into this is that these people are killing themselves. These are suicide bombers. This is something we haven't seen happening in mainstream terrorist attacks in countries like the United States before. So we're seeing the weapons of which we've seen on the streets of Israel over the last few days, and indeed in other parts of the world occasionally, now being used quite deliberately by people getting on planes and driving themselves, and possibly passengers with them, into buildings in the United States.
Brian, just stay with Gather. We can actually hear from Yasser Arafat talking now. Let's hear what he has to say.
American President Bush, to his government, to the American people for this terrible act. We are completely shocked, unbelievable.
Let's put this unfolding story in context for you. Let's talk to one of our correspondents in Jerusalem, Orla Guerin. Orla, what's the reaction there today?
Well, there's been enormous shock. People have been watching the events unfolding with a sense of absolute horror. We know that the CIA has been in contact with the Israeli government, with the intelligence community here, seeking assistance, seeking any kind of information, any clues that they may have as to who could have been behind these attacks.
Is there a sense there, it's afternoon here, it must be early evening with you, is there a sense there that everyone on the Palestinian side and the Israeli side really just wants to keep a lid on this because it may not be over yet?
Well, I think there is a feeling of considerable dread here. I mean, there's been a build-up of anticipation all afternoon. People have been waiting to see if the finger would be pointed towards this region. Obviously, there's been a great deal of speculation that some Middle Eastern factions could be involved. I should tell you, though, that we have had reports within the last half hour, an hour or so, that there were spontaneous celebrations in some Palestinian areas.
Now, let's get the very latest from Washington, D.C. Our correspondent, John Line, joins us now. John, for anybody just joining us, bring us up to date with the chain of events, specifically in Washington.
I was actually at Reagan National Airport, close to the centre of Washington, waiting to catch a flight to New York to cover the events there. When we heard about the explosion at the Pentagon, the airport was very quickly evacuated. I went outside, and there was a horrible pall of black smoke coming up from there. And the word from leaving the airport was that a Boeing 757 had crashed into the Pentagon building. You could smell this horrible smell coming over and a few little bits of debris even blowing over. We were evacuated and then gradually pushed farther away as reports, rumours perhaps, who knows, of another hijacked plane in the area circulated, and we were pushed farther and farther away from the airport in case it was crashed there or crashed onto the Pentagon, which is very close by. I spoke to actually some people who'd been due to be on one of the flights which crashed, so they were pretty relieved, as you can understand. But the general feeling, I think, here, it just hasn't sunk in. People were asking, for example, how's their luggage going to get to them? Is it going to get to the hotel? Which hotel are they going to stay in? They haven't quite worked out the enormity of this disaster. And now in downtown D.C., all the federal offices are being evacuated, and yet somehow, in some senses, a bit of normality remains. I'm in a subway station now where at last I could find a telephone, and the trains are running. And the middle of the Mall, this great historic heart of Washington, it's quite normal. People are walking around. I guess there are probably even the odd tourist around.
Let's talk live now to our reporter Ian Williams, who's in the financial district of New York. Ian, what's going on there right now?
Well, it's mostly sort of aftershocks and people are trying to get in towards the building. As you know, it began around 8:30 this morning, and ever since then there's been a steady sort of stream as the whole of the financial district is getting evacuated. And since all of the subways are out and all of the roads are blocked, there's a sort of columns of people, almost like an Eisenstein movie, been marching up the FDR and across the bridges away from the scene of the crime.
Is there anyone, when it comes to the police or the ambulance service or the fire brigade, is anyone coordinating some sort of massive evacuation?
It seems to be mostly sort of, as far as I can tell, it's mostly sort of spontaneous. People are just getting the hell out of it along the easiest routes. Ironically, as far as I remember, Mayor Giuliani built in the World Trade Center, about halfway up, he built his emergency disaster control center. So that's one of the casualties of this.
And are people quite calm?
Yes, I mean, mostly people, they're shocked, but New Yorkers divide into two kinds. There are rubberneckers who'll stand and stare regardless if it impedes the effort, and there's others who are just marching on, but there's people wearing very strange headgear and masks, things over their heads, and some even carrying umbrellas to ward off the... There's a continuous fall of dust and ash from the... which began after the implosion of the first tower. When it collapsed, there was a huge cloud that reduced visibility to almost nothing. And the cars are going past. The cars that are coming out from the area are just covered in... It looked like snow from a distance, but it's just ash all over. But of course, there's well, pretty much nothing to see now.
Is it your feeling, Ian, that the emergency services can actually cope with this because it's such a massive event? One would assume that they can't, initially at least.
Well, I mean, this happened at peak hour. I mean, driving through New York at the best of times is bad. At peak hour, it's worse. And at peak hour, when your sort of centerpiece work center, the sort of center of capitalism and globalization for the world goes up, it's very difficult. One of the things, sort of comments on modern life, was that, of course, the antennae for the most people's cell phones are stuck on top of the Twin Towers, or were stuck on top of the Twin Towers. So, you know, people who are used to walking along talking to their cell phones suddenly found that just when they wanted to get hold of people, it was gone.
Just to give you a couple more latest pieces of information, Canary Wharf, which is in London's Docklands, has been evacuated. Also, the latest news out of Montreal, news from Canada's Transport Ministry. The Reuters news agency is saying that all airports in Canada have been shut. Now, the mayor of New York City, Rudolph Giuliani, talked about a tremendous loss of life in New York, as he's called it. Of course, no one able to be specific about casualty numbers at this stage. And in the last few minutes, he has been walking through the streets of New York, meeting people, looking at the vast rescue operation that is underway. Well, here in London, meanwhile, our political correspondent John Pienaar is at Downing Street awaiting the arrival of the Prime Minister. John, he should be with you shortly, we think.
That's right. They've opened the gates at the end of Downing Street now, waiting for the Prime Minister to arrive. That should be happening pretty much any minute now. And we know that very soon after that, he'll be chairing a meeting of senior ministers, including the Home Secretary, the Foreign Secretary, and all under the umbrella of what's called COBRA. That's the Emergency Planning Committee, which will include representatives of military and security departments.
John, we know, of course, that buildings and premises and streets in many big cities across the states have been evacuated. Just bring us up to date with what's happening in London as far as we know it, particularly, obviously, around Westminster, where you are.
Well, what we know for certain is already that the level of security alertness has been officially raised. The top level is described in security jargon as Bikini Black Alpha, and that's very likely to be the level reached. It involves, obviously, the maximum level of checks on entrances to government departments and general awareness and security procedures.
Well, people in New York City have been telling reporters what they saw.
I was on the 36th floor of Building 1, and all of a sudden it was like an earthquake. Just shook, the building was shaking, then I saw chunks of debris just falling down because I was close to the window. It was unbelievable. I don't know if everybody's okay or not. It looks like a mess up there.
How did you get out of the building?
I went down the stairs, water was coming down all over the place, smoke. There was a lot of people on wheelchairs. Just everybody was pitching in to help everybody else.
What was the feeling like in the building?
Just complete mayhem that few people took charge and they kept calm and kept moving people down.
I was in One World Trade Center.
And what was it like in there? Did they start evacuating?
Yeah, as soon as it got hit, I was thrown to a window. So I was very lucky to get out. There's a lot of people that didn't get out. There's a lot of people coming down the stairs, burnt up. It's bad.
Everything just went black. Everything came down, glass are popping. People got hurt, stuff went on top of them. And it was a big explosion. Everything got dark, real dark, like snow. You can see behind me, oh, this is not snow. This is all from the building. It was a terrible nightmare.
Now, in the past few moments, just as we were listening to that, there have been a number of developments. They're coming thick and fast from Islamabad. Agence France-Presse, the French news agency, is reporting that Afghanistan's ruling Taliban militia are denying that the Saudi dissident Osama bin Laden has played any role in a series of apparent terrorist attacks on the United States. And we have some news of the aircraft which are missing. The Federal Aviation Administration, which monitors aircraft flights in the United States, is now confirming that 4 commercial flights, 2 from United Airlines and 2 from American Airlines, are indeed missing and believed to have been involved in the attacks on New York and Washington. Separately, United Airlines is now saying it is deeply concerned about Flight 175 from Boston to Los Angeles. and we're getting reports of what President Bush has been saying in a stopover at an Air Force base in Louisiana.
We have taken all appropriate security precautions to protect the American people. Our military at home and around the world is on high alert status, and we have taken the necessary security precautions to continue the functions of your government. We have been in touch with the leaders of Congress and with world leaders to assure them that we will do whatever is necessary to protect America and Americans. The resolve of our great nation is being tested. But make no mistake, we will show the world that we will pass this test. God bless.
That was President Bush at a stopover in Barksdale Air Force Base. He's taken off from Louisiana to an undisclosed destination. US officials are now telling the wire services they have some indications that people associated with Osama bin Laden, the Saudi-born fugitive from the Americans who is now believed to be living in Afghanistan, some people associated with bin Laden are linked to this attack. The Prime Minister has just strode into Downing Street. He's going to make a statement.
I've just chaired an emergency meeting of the British Government Civil Contingencies Committee, and I would like to explain some of the measures that we have agreed to take here. There are a range of precautionary measures. We have stepped up security at airports to the highest levels. No flights will take off from the United Kingdom for which we cannot apply the highest standards of security for aircrew and passengers. Private flights have been stopped except where specifically authorised. Flight paths into London have been changed so there will be no civil overflights of central London. Security has been increased across the full range of government buildings and military premises. The police across the whole of the UK are on full alert. All our defence facilities around the world have been moved to high alert to ensure the protection of British service personnel. Advice has been given to major financial and business institutions about appropriate security measures. But other than the specific measures we have taken, or that we have advised others to take, business and everyday life can continue as normal. This is not a battle between the United States of America and terrorism, but between the free and democratic world and terrorism. We therefore here in Britain stand shoulder to shoulder with our American friends in this hour of tragedy, and we, like them, will not rest until this evil is driven from our world.
New pictures have just arrived from the World Trade Center, and they are pictures of such devastation. Frankly, I've never seen anything quite like it, except for pictures from World War II of the bombings of some of the cities. We're looking at the wreckage of what was one of the tallest buildings in the world, with some of the emergency services walking around in a grisly landscape, almost like a lunar landscape. There is almost nothing left standing except a few pieces of metal, it looks like, supports for those hugely powerful and rather beautiful towers at the southern end of Manhattan.
And people are still being rescued from ruined buildings in New York. Here's how some people escaped.
It just blew out the plaza we were at.
It was complete dark, there is no light. So just got somebody with little light came up because we couldn't even see what's happening. We all, with dust and debris. And
how'd you get out?
Well, the firefighter, somebody with little light came eventually, and we were following him.
And go to. What did you do?
The police officer told everybody to form a human chain, and we held on to each other, and he flashed the light, and he directed us to Building 5, and we went out Building 5.
Did you see people bleeding, and what did you see?
Oh, everybody could see. You want blood? Here's blood. Everybody's bleeding. People are laying all over the floor. It's horrible. And I was there the first time, and this is twice.
some reaction on the streets of New York. There we can see what looks like the Salomon Brothers building. It's 47 stories high. The World Trade Center towers were 110 stories high. And this building appears to have been weakened by debris or perhaps parts of the plane from the initial crash. You can see the building go there. And you can also imagine the difficulties faced by the emergency services on the streets of Manhattan as they try to conduct their rescue efforts, not knowing which, if any, of the buildings around them is also likely to collapse in just that way.
We're seeing the helicopter of President George W. Bush arriving now at the White House. He's coming from Andrews Air Force Base, just outside Washington, which is, he's finally arrived late on today. He's been on a long journey, started off in Florida, then went to Louisiana, then up to Nebraska, and finally is arriving back in Washington. And he's expected actually to make a statement to the nation in just over an hour's time.
Our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts. The victims were in airplanes or in their offices. Secretaries, businessmen and women, military and federal workers, moms and dads, friends and neighbors. Thousands of lives were suddenly ended by evil, despicable acts of terror. The pictures of airplanes flying into buildings, fires burning, huge structures collapsing, have filled us with disbelief, terrible sadness, and a quiet, unyielding anger. Today, our nation saw evil, the very worst of human nature, and we responded with the best of America. With the daring of our rescue workers, with the caring of strangers and neighbors who came to give blood and help in any way they could. None of us will ever forget this day, yet we go forward to defend freedom and all that is good and just in our world. Thank you, good night, and God bless America.